Hello, everyone. Nightmare here, and this is Whale FM Makerspace Edition. In this show, we talk about everything and anything art and crypto in the NFT scene with designers and creators alike, otherwise known as non-fungible tokens. My guest today is Jonathan Monaghan, the award-winning visual artist whose fantastical pieces uncover subconscious fears associated with technology and consumerism. His latest collection, Tetramorphs, fuse together a mythical past with anxieties about an uncertain future. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Really excited to talk to you after looking into your work and what a unique juxtaposition that it is. For anyone that might not be familiar, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and walk us through your background and journey in art?
Yeah, so I'm a visual artist. I work across a range of different media from sculpture to prints and mostly computer animated films. I exhibit my work in galleries and museums all over the world. And I've been obviously a digital artist for a long time. And so I've been interested in NFTs for a long time as well. And yeah, so that's a quick, brief thing about me. I grew up in New York and I'm based in Washington, D.C.
Very cool. Now, were you always interested in the arts, or this is an evolution that happened over time? I got a little bit about your background, but I find it pretty fascinating, kind of the progression that you went through.
Yeah, I think like a lot of artists that work with digital technology, I sort of got into this from maybe, video games. And I was sort of making my own video games back in high school, and I went to college to study computer graphics. And I had sort of taught myself a lot of the 3D software that I still use today. Way back then, back when I was a kid. And I was always just really fascinated with its ability to you sort of conjure up any imagery that you want with computer graphics, with 3D modeling and animation software. And that felt really empowering to me. And I didn't have many artistic skills. I wasn't particularly good with drawing or painting or these other types of ways in which you can produce visual imagery. And so the software gave me that outlet to be able to unleash my sort of imagination and create images. And so that led me to working in this sort of analog space of contemporary art, making prints, making films, and trying to create work that was quite challenging. So for instance, here, this was a recent solo exhibition of my work in Paris. And so all of that imagery is created using the computer, using 3D modeling and animation software, but they're printed out as these large wall decals that take up a whole wall. So they're these really large encompassing imagery. It's a multimedia practice.
Very interesting. So, your interest in video games kind of progressed you to trying to create them yourselves, and within that kind of context, you really appreciated the artistic liberty that it gave you, right, to create environments and things of that nature. Did you kind of pivot from wanting to create the games to wanting to express yourself via that medium, or did you try to do both in unison?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, what I was doing was I was making like environments or maps for Counter Strike and a lot of these sort of online games. These sort of they were called like modding communities. And so I was involved in just doing these things, and I was always more interested in the visuals. Like I wasn't ever interested in like the gameplay mechanics behind these levels or how well they worked as an actual game to play on, or an arena or a map to play on. I was always more interested in the visuals, creating something that was like visually cool to explore. And so that led me to more advanced 3D modeling and animation software, the same software I'm using today, which are these industry standard software packages. And so, it was like a progression from working on, these games and working with the 3D environments in the games and the assets and the environments of the games to working with software that was just able to produce these images, like the images you see here. These are prints. They're on an exhibition in Dubai right now, and these are just really detailed renderings. And so I was really interested in the way that the software could allow me to construct these really detailed, realistic yet imaginative objects and spaces and things like that. So
It's interesting when we brought up that you would be coming on to Whale FM. Someone characterized your work as reminding them of Return to Oz, which to me is interesting because it's always referenced as slightly dark, vibrant movie, right? Like it's definitely tonality is a little bit different. Talk to me about how you would characterize your art style and aesthetic, because I can definitely, now that I'm familiar with you, look at one of your pieces and say this is probably Jonathan.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a work of contrast and juxtapositions, right? We see in all of my work this contrast between the natural and the man-made, and so, or something like that, what you just had up, it's this bull, it's this natural animal, right? And yet it's in this very sci-fi sort of robotic cyborg, sort of situation. In all of this work too, you see soft fabrics, other natural forms contrasted with like sci-fi bits of hardware and technology. And so these contrasts are, really the sort of the characterization of my work. There's also oftentimes a lot of gold and Baroque details and ornamentation in the work. And that is in service to, I think, thinking about like our desires and all of these surfaces that I create are like you feel like you want to touch them, right? They're like very smooth and refined, but you can't because they're virtual. And so that sort of frustration and that tension between the physical and the virtual is something I also explore in my work. So it's all about these tensions, and then there's also like this tension between the past and the future. There's a futuristic quality to the work, but then there are also all these references to like Baroque architecture or ancient mythologies or historical works of art.
I love the thought process behind it and how it really makes you have to interpret, your own fears and what you think about, the juxtaposition. Rewind a little bit for me. You're obviously interested in video games. It kind of carries over to you exploring this medium and how you can express yourself therein. When do you decide this is something I want to pursue and make a focus of my career and what I'm going to do in life?
Yeah, I guess, I was in college, and so I was, studying computer graphics, and I, maybe, yeah, wanted to work in video games or work in the animation industry, take a much more commercial approach to things, which is cool. There's so many amazing people that are doing that. But I guess maybe I was a little naive in thinking that I could sort of make a career as an artist. I mean, I guess I am, but it's very difficult. Just sort of going out on your own and just presenting my ideas in these, gallery contexts and these other spaces, and trying to, get exhibitions and trying to all do. It's definitely very challenging. But yeah, it was definitely a jump that I, appreciate making because I've always just felt like I really need all of that creative control. And I guess I'm just not good working with other people on a more complex project. I have to make my own sort of weird things and my own weird imagery. So it only really works when I'm out on my own and presenting it in these contexts that really embrace experimentation and originality.
Someone DM'd me and said, they can't imagine how you went from Counter Strike to this, right? So with that comment in mind, obviously you talked about thematically what are some of the influences and things that inspire you, but what would you say were some of your major influences visually? What helped you shape and come to this aesthetic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, even something like this that's on the screen right now, I think a lot of artists that use technology are inherently concerned with our relationship to technology. It's just sort of this default, right? Where we're really worried about its effect on us and on society. So even a work like this, it's all about sort of touching and tactility, but it's all virtual. It's all not real. And there's also this surreal, dreamlike quality going on where this ordinary man-made Baroque surface wouldn't have this tactile quality. So there's all these like tensions and contrasts that I think sort of are like maybe a metaphor or a symbol for a lot of the frustrations we have with interacting with, as technology takes over so much of our, interactions and so much more of our lives. There's this frustration that I think I'm exploring in this work. And then, so yeah, and so visually, I also am always drawn to this Baroque architecture and this Baroque symbolism. And I think there's also a lot of power dynamics happening when we talk about technology in the digital age. And they're not as maybe visually apparent as they were back in the Baroque era, with this Baroque regalia and these, imperial symbols and things like this. And so also the Baroque era was a very decadent time, right? And we don't tend to think of our world today is very decadent, but I think our obsession with digital technology is a very decadent thing, right? And so all of these characterizations are coming together in the work here. You can see that idea play out pretty well here. You know, the surveillance camera in this sort of Baroque dome, and it's all very surreal. You know.
Someone made a comment that, it seems that, a lot of your work has zoomorphic or personification of animals involved in it. Is that a conscious decision? Is there a specific purpose for that, or is it just something that you're fond
Yeah.
of?
Yeah, a large part of my work is looking at ancient mythological stories and ancient mythological creatures. So, for instance, this work that's up here, this was based off of a medieval depiction of a panther, specifically a panther with a very colorful hide. And so it's a symbol that appears in various medieval texts and like heraldic symbols and stories. And so it also had like flames coming out of its eyes and its ears. And so if you look closely, you'll see the flames coming out of this panther's eyes and ears here. But like instead of, just having the colorful hide, it has like app icons on it, And so all of what I do is I like to take these ancient stories and these ancient symbols of mythical creatures and like reinvent them for the digital age. And it's a little bit humorous. It's a little bit tongue in cheek. It's a little bit funny. But it's also, I think, providing a sort of a new mythology for the digital age, which is something that I'm sort of very interested in doing with this type of work.
Yeah, what's old is new, right? I hope that I can articulate when I think something just looks badass and awesome as well as you can, and the real nuance behind it and why it can mean much more. How has your art style evolved since you started? What's the progression been like to get to where you are
Yeah.
now?
Well, I think it's I've part of it is also like a technical progression, right? I mean, the software that I use and that so many other digital artists use is very complex tool, and it's sort of like a craft, and we don't think of it as a craft, like let's say ceramics or metal work or marble carving, but it is a craft in a way because the more time you spend with it, the more you learn, the more you perfect how to work with it, and the better you are at connecting your ideas to the final form. And so I think over the years, working with the software for what's probably like gosh, I don't know, like 20 something years now. It's been really great to, for me to bring out my ideas in a more effective way. The more I understand the technical process and the better I get with the software, and also the better the software gets itself. There's been so many improvements in rendering and in the ways in which the software can help artists express their ideas.
So, what's the creative process for you like from, conception to, at the end when you think it's completed and done? Are you one of the people to get inspiration and you'll bang it out quick, or is it a long progression of something you tinker with over time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So take this piece that's on the screen now. This work started by looking at historical paintings and other depictions of the apocalypse, the end of the world, from the Book of Revelation. So this is one of the four horsemen, which is biblical symbol, but also rather a just a sort of a universal symbol that's it's become very commonplace symbol for sort of this end of times or the end of the world. And so like a work like this is oftentimes directly referencing a lot of like historical paintings that depict the apocalypse. So this work is starts by just absorbing all these references and stories, and then sort of sketching out my ideas and developing them into a narrative. And with works like these, they take a long time. So this is just one section of a film that's about 18 minutes long, and so it takes a while to make that work, and these ideas form and brew over time. So yeah, it's definitely a long process. It's not something I don't just bang something out like in one night after getting inspiration. It's a very long process for me.
Right, right. I can only imagine. You probably have some that have been sitting there for some time, and you're just waiting for the proper, I guess, inspiration to take it to fruition. And you've mentioned that you work in a variety of mediums, and I saw, 3D printing. We saw some live installations. Can you tell us a little bit about the breadth of your endeavors and what you do?
Yeah, one of the things that also fascinated me about using digital technology as an artist was the the way in which you can produce physical objects as a result of any types of visual things you're doing in basically in 3D software, mostly, right? It's with 3D printing and other digital fabrication techniques. And so very early on, I was exposed to 3D printing and became really absorbed in that. And so this was a very important aspect for me too, because it allowed me to think about my work as like an art object, and not just a visual that's on the screen. It allowed me to think about my practice and what I'm doing as this sort of multimedia art practice as something that people could explore my ideas and themes by looking at a sculpture, and then see those same visuals and themes and ideas explored by looking at a film. And so that going in between those different mediums has always been very interesting and empowering to me. So I've been involved in 3D printing for just as long, and other digital fabrication techniques. Right now, I'm making a marble sculpture in Italy, finishing it up out of Carrara marble, and so it's going to be on display in Milan soon. So there's always these different digital fabrication processes going on in my world as well.
Fascinating. And you were one of the earliest adopters of NFTs, really experimenting with a prototype, so to speak, right, of what the technology is used for and its intention. What was the catalyst for that, and how did you find your way into experimenting with what would become the NFT space?
Yeah, so I think as an artist, artists sell their work to collectors and museums and institutions, and so when you have something like what you just had up, like a video installation, that only exists as an MP4 file, right? Like how do you sell that to a collector, and they how do you sell that to a museum? And so there's certainly things that have existed for decades, certificates of authenticity and things like that. But ultimately, you're just selling a computer file, something that can be copied, or something that you can lose, something that can be changed very easily. And so that is always made collectors and even institutions a little wary about acquiring a digital artwork. And myself and many other digital artists have experienced this. And so back in 2013, I was talking with a curator and her husband, who was interested in blockchain, and this was 2013, so there was only Bitcoin back then. And so we sort of began speculating and musing on, well, can we use this Bitcoin blockchain and use this idea of a distributed ledger for the tracking of provenance and the authentication of a digital artwork? And so, this was Trent McConney now, and he was a tech guy, and he was very interested in, all the tech behind it. I was the art part of this, and I'm just like, yeah, this is great. This is really interesting. And it brings another level to that authentication process, how to make a digital file unique. That blockchain really brings another level to it. And so we experimented with what were essentially like proto NFTs. We were doing transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain. Trent was developing this architecture to sort of build on top of that, but it was all very experimental, and it wasn't as efficient as the Ethereum or other modern blockchains are at this idea of a token. There wasn't this idea of an NFT that didn't exist back then. It was trying to build this architecture on top of the blockchain, but I think the feeling is the same as to what these NFTs are today, but they're just even way more powerful in what you can do with them, and the marketplaces behind them and everything like that. So.
Right. Well, certainly that's a long time to be witnessing, the evolution of the technology and where it's gone in the last nearly decade, right? Let alone the past year, where things have exploded onto the mainstream. Being that you were kind of conceptualizing this very early, what are your thoughts on the evolution of the space, and kind of where it's at right now, and where you've seen it go over the years?
Yeah, well, it's funny, I give a lot of credit to Trent. I mean, he was the visionary that saw a lot of what's happening today. He saw it all back then. And frankly, I must admit, I didn't see it all happening. I thought he was maybe a little too enthusiastic about the potential of blockchain and all of this. I always saw it as this really great way to authenticate digital artworks, but we have frankly had a lot of trouble getting people to listen to what we were doing and getting people to catch on to this idea. and it was just way over the head for a lot of people. And so it obviously took a while for this idea to explode more into what it is today. And so I was like surprised, and I was uh, also amazed to see the changes and how it's developed and evolved. And yeah, there's been some amazing results of it. I think that on one hand, there's been an elevation of art created with digital technology. That wasn't there before, even in the art world. Even though there's been many artists who've been very successful using digital technology, there was still a little stigma associated with art. It was just that it was never on the same level as like a Picasso or these like works that go for millions of dollars at auction. And so I think it's elevated that to a very high level. And as we think of what's the important artwork in a society, digital artwork has become now, I think, very elevated in that regard. And then also, there's been this amazing confluence of different creative industries, whether that's music or sports or fashion. All of these different things, which were very separate before, I think are now starting to fuse together in really interesting ways. And so I've collaborated with musicians on NFT projects. There's just so many connections going on in that regard as well. So that's another great thing to see develop in this space.
Yeah, and a culture really growing behind it that helps, support it and for good and bad, right? There's a lot of discussion on what that means relative to the art itself, but certainly it's helped bring an influx of capital to help build the infrastructure. It helps put it into the people's minds that are going to value the art in many ways versus the commoditization of it, and they can just right click save or not understand what supporting an artist or being able to do things with it meant. So interesting days to come. I'm sure we're still at the precipice of what this could become as it continues to get mainstream adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm interested to see what comes ahead, but I think as long as artists are involved, good things are going to happen. I think artists have always adopted new technologies and not only have used them in creative ways and have used them to create amazing artworks, but they've shown the world what's possible with these technologies. I think of like, some of the when the idea of the printing press was developed. I mean, artists were taking this technology, which wasn't developed for the dissemination of images, but they did that. They figured out how to disseminate images and produce images in this mass production way, and that was revolutionary. Photography too. Artists immediately adopted this development of photography to create all kinds of innovative and amazing projects. I think of this one photographer, this French photographer Nadar, who figured out, well, I could take, and this was like very early on in the development of photography. He took a camera up in a hot air balloon and developed some of the first aerial photography. And so these kinds of things are really important for artists to embrace and to experiment with. And so I think as long as artists are involved, good things are going to happen. This is going to evolve in really impactful ways.
I agree 100%. Someone that really appreciated the piece that we had on not long ago that it had a VGA port. I thought that was that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Um, how would you characterize NFTs as a cultural movement in the context of the things you're exploring your collection of technology kind of emerging and being, kind of at a tightrope that we're walking, not knowing where it's leading us and the dangers and pitfalls of it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in my work, that's definitely something I explore, and so one of the ways I do that is by having, as we were talking about earlier, these contrasting forms, having like bits of technology or VGA ports and cables sort of contrasted with these like soft organic fabrics or this Baroque architecture or, these associations that you normally don't think about with technology. And so, I think it helps connect technology to human nature. And that's, I think, trying to, what my work is trying to do. So yeah, so I definitely think it's always important to have a critical awareness of any artistic medium that you use, but particularly as technology is becoming more important and encompassing in our lives, I think it's important to always bring this critical awareness of it into the dialogue.
So obviously the world's changed over the past couple of years with COVID. A lot more people have spent more time isolated. It's evoked different emotions in different people. Has it impacted your creative process at all or your focus?
Yeah, I think it's been a challenge, absolutely, in many ways. In a lot of my work, traditionally, how I exhibit my work is in like large scale video installations, which require like a physical presence, and there's a very big difference between seeing a work on a computer screen and seeing a work, in a specifically designed, 20-foot projection space, where there's a lot of thinking about how people are, experiencing it. And so, so that's been a challenge. And I think actually NFTs, again, providing this community, I think perhaps I'm speculating one of the reasons for this crazy NFT explosion we saw over the past year amongst not just the visual arts but all sorts of industries has been, the fact that we're sort of, a lot of these physical events have, just stopped happening or whatever. And so, I speculate that's one of the reasons why we've seen all this energy. It's all this like built up energy has just sort of exploded in NFT communities and in NFT spaces and things like that. So so that's I think that's something I'm speculating on.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Hopefully, more people stick around when they can go outside. I think they will. I think people have been indoctrinated a little bit into understanding, the value proposition that these things provide. But, there's a lot of platforms that really onboarded people in a seamless way. They don't even realize that it's an NFT. They just think it's a new way to participate in an ecosystem or something that they enjoy and love, like collecting a sports card or whatever. So, I do think that even when the world opens up fully, because it varies depending on where you are. I do think this is the beginning of something that will continue. So talk to me about Tetramorphs, this particular collection that you dropped on Makersplace, and where this is relative to the other collections that you've done and the thematics that you've explored.
Yeah, so I'm really happy with this work that I created for Makerspace. It's really a project about uh, our concerns and our anxieties about the future. And so, in order to do that, I was looking at, which I do in all my work, I look at various historical imagery and historical narratives. And so, I was looking at like ancient imagery of like prophecies and the zodiac sign, which is supposed to have this sort of, kind of you think about the future when you're thinking about your zodiac sign, right? And so, in the Tetramorphs, we see a few different mythological creatures that I created that are related to the zodiac sign. So we have a Scorpio and a Taurus. And so the colors and the animal imagery that you see in those pieces are related to the colors and animal imagery that we associate with those zodiac signs. And then they all come together in this piece called Megazod, which is a lot like the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, when those robots come together to form one big robot. And that piece is inspired by these like medieval depictions of like prophetic beings and angels and otherworldly beings. And so it's this sort of symbol of our anxieties and fears we have about the future in a way. Because the works do look a little menacing, even though they have these very luxurious details and luxurious textures. The work's a little menacing looking, So
Right. I have to ask you though, Green or White Ranger?
I always liked the Blue Ranger. He was the tech guy, right? So
Okay, you're going outside the box. I like it. I like it. So
right.
these dropped yesterday, I believe, right? So the
Yeah.
Megazod is available on auction. There's editions of the Scorpio and the Taurus. Now, will this be a series that encompasses more of the zodiac, or is this it for
Yeah,
this
I got
collection?
I got more coming down the pipeline for sure. So this is definitely something I think people are gonna want to keep an eye on and see where see the new pieces that I have working in this way. There's definitely more coming.
Very interesting. Given that your work explores the danger and uncertainty of leaning into virtual and tech, talk to me about the metaverse. What does it mean to you, and what's your perspective on it, given your cautious approach?
Yeah, well, I think that term is sort of ill-defined, right? We don't really know what we're talking about when we talk about the metaverse, right? Sometimes
Right.
I think everybody has a different idea of what that is, and I think perhaps that's part of the problem. But yeah, I think technology is here to stay, right? And it's you can't really fight against it. You can't like go up against the grain, and you have to sort of figure out ways in which you can use technology in sort of meaningful and more human ways, and in ways that are more positive, right? And so I think anytime there's an impetus to build something new, or to change something when it comes to technology, that's a good thing, because there's definitely a lot of room to grow in order to make technology work with us better and work for us better. So I think there's a lot of question marks. We don't know what the metaverse is or what's coming, but I think the more we give artists and creative people control, the more we support artists and other creatives. If we can build an environment where that's the case, it's good things are going to happen. I think for sure.
Thank you for that insight. Always like hearing from people that may have different perspectives on it instead of just advocacy. It's great to have some semblance of balance. What's the next evolution for Jonathan Monaghan? What are you working on next and working towards progressing? And
So like I mentioned, I'm doing a marble sculpture in Italy. It's also referencing an historical artwork. It's referencing an ancient Greek statue called the Abala Belvedere, and it we see that also that sculpture a lot in like vaporwave. If you're familiar with like vaporwave and the vaporwave aesthetic, you'll see like that sculpture used a lot. Anyway, so I'm making my own take on it. And that's being developed, it's being carved by robots using digital fabrication technology in Italy right now. So that's a really cool project. It'll premiere in Milan in June, and then more info is coming about that soon. I'm also working with a museum in Washington D.C. called the Phillips Collection, and they're actually the first modern art museum in America. Although all the work they have is very old, because it was, a modern art museum that was developed in the 20s and 30s, and so
right.
there's historical paintings in their collection that I'm being inspired by to create new works. So I'm developing a new video installation in the museum in the fall, and there's going to be these historical paintings displayed alongside this project that I create for it. So that's really exciting. So I got a lot of stuff happening for sure.
Definitely a busy man. Um, Man, if you have a little bit more time with us, I'd love to pass along some of these questions from the community that have been DM'd. What do you consider to be the best medium to view your art?
Yeah, I always say in person. Particularly, I mean, I think my main focus of my work are these large scale, large format video installations, and so they're like 20 minutes long. They're all computer animated, and they're actually often composed of a single continuous camera shot. So, and they're installed very large in a gallery space, and so it becomes like this sort of all like you're sort of really thrown into this world that I'm creating when you're experiencing it in person like that. And so I think when it comes to like digital work and NFTs, I'm creating works that are a little different, so that they could be more appreciated in the context that people tend to see them in. So that's been a challenge, working with NFTs and things like that, trying to create work that's a bit more suited to a smaller screen. So I think with any artist, you have to really think about presentation and how this work, gets presented. And so there's different considerations that I do for that. But yeah, definitely see it in person if you can. And hopefully there'll be more exhibitions and opportunities to do that in the future.
Have you dabbled with AR or VR with your works? And if not, any plans to do so in the future?
Yeah, I know like so many artists that do incredible things with AR and VR. For me, I'm I think it's a different experience than what I'm going for. Like when I display my work in a gallery, like I said, it's usually this large scale video installation. It becomes more sculptural in a way. It's like almost like a sculptural object, even though it's a video projection. I like to display them in such a way where they take on like this sculptural presence. And so that's a little different with something like VR, where it's just more about the experience, right? And so when you have the VR headset on your head, or for instance. So I never really explored it that much, but there's so many artists doing incredible things with it. It's definitely a really powerful artistic medium.
Yeah, I think who knows, we may see you down that path at some point, being that you
Yeah.
create physicals as well, right? So there's a lot of cool things that could integrate it further. I can't help but notice as I'm perusing here, references to Mario World or Mario 64, Rainbow Road from Mario Kart, and a lot of other video game references.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that's so fascinating about working with 3D modeling and animation software is the ability, any 3D content is so sort of, I guess what you would call mutable, right? Like you can take it uh, from a video game and you could remix it and create something else with it. And so this like flexibility of like 3D assets and content to move across different areas of 3D is really interesting to me. And so for a few projects, I would like download the N64 ROM and sort of rip out some of the assets, and it's like a kind of a collage in a way. And it's particularly when you take these very iconic things like Rainbow Road or the Super Mario Castle or something like that, it becomes this sort of interesting symbol. So yeah, so these were just sort of experiments, sort of taking in some of those assets, these sort of spaces and symbols that were from my, I guess certainly my childhood, and remixing them and reimagining them in new ways to tell a slightly different story.
Yeah, I never thought seeing Sub-Zero in the Mushroom Kingdom would be so jarring. So thank you for that. That's a new one for me for sure.
Yeah.
Someone asked, what are some NFT projects or artists that you are a fan of?
Yeah. So I'm just blown away by the massive amount of work that has been, created in NFTs. There's so much powerful work that's happening out there. It's hard to keep track of all the incredible artists that are out there. So yeah, I've been interested to see a lot of the artists that, for instance, I'm represented by a gallery in New York called Bitforms Gallery, and so they represent a number of artists that I really love. Aurea Harvey, Sarah Ludi, for instance. These are some artists that have these digital art practices, and then they've really done some interesting projects in the NFT space. So you could take a look at their work for sure. Yeah, there's so many. I could stand here and just name all these incredible artists, but I think so many. You just go to like Makerspace or Foundation, and these are really well curated platforms. So there's a lot of really top stuff on there.
Definitely. Someone wants to know more about what video games you were partial to.
The usual. I definitely played the Mario Kart and Super Mario. And then, yeah, I guess I was always interested though in like games that gave you a little bit of creative control, like SimCity, for instance. And so, yeah, so pretty soon, like yeah, I was playing like Counter Strike and these online Half Life mods and things like that. But I was mostly immediately drawn to like that accessibility, and I think Valve was really smart by putting out those software developer kits and encouraging people to create their own mods and enhancements on the game. Because I was like a 13-year-old kid, and I was like starting to learn coding and all of the other techniques you need for creating like virtual maps and all of that stuff. So it was yeah, it was a really cool experience being able to have that sort of creative control when it comes to video games, not just be like this consumer of them, but become this like active participant or creator in it.
Right. The modding community is extremely talented, and to know that that was the kind of the bed that kind of raised you up and gave you your start is incredible, and just lends credence to that. That everybody knows, such incredible work comes from there. Have you worked on any video game or film projects?
I did some internships and stuff when I was younger, in the video game world. Nothing too crazy. Yeah, but no, I think it was before I really got into like the workforce was when I decided to go in the direction of being an artist, being an independent, contemporary artist. So I didn't get a whole lot of experience working in that industry. I've collaborated with like brands and I've done some other works and stuff on the side, but no, I don't. I never had a lot of experience in that industry. But yeah, I don't know if I, in another life, for sure, I would go make video games or something.
if someone tapped your shoulder and said, "Hey, could you contribute to this project?" Would that excite you, or
Yeah,
you're not really into it
absolutely. I mean,
anymore?
I'd love to like art direct or a video game or do art direction on a film project or something like that. Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be a dream come true.
This is a I guess I can we can take care of two birds with one stone here. Someone asked, do you work with music at all and curating music or working with producers to put something together? And I obviously had seen, your collaboration over on crypto.com as well. So could you talk to that a little bit and that process for you?
Yeah, so I made several, animated films, that like I said, that I show in galleries and museums, and they often
Right.
have original soundtracks. So I frequently collaborate with musicians to develop original soundtracks for my work, and that's a really awesome collaborative process. And then yeah, then I've also done visuals for musicians, and I also in the NFT space too collaborated with the viral TikTok star Nathan Evans to develop a series of NFTs commemorating his famous viral Wellerman's sea shanty hit. This was very popular during the pandemic. He went on TikTok singing these old school sea shanties and got really popular. Now he's like a #1 recording artist. And so that was a really cool project for sure. And again, that's what I'm talking about. You're seeing all these collaborations now in all of these fields that weren't so connected before. All of a sudden, got very connected very quickly, thanks to NFTs.
And in that vein, any exciting collaborations in the works that you could talk to us about?
Nothing I could really talk to you about. I'm always open to for more collaborations, but if time allows, But yeah,
All right. So it sounds like there are some, but I'm trying to infer from the smirk. There are some exciting things, but you just can't quite tell me just quite yet. So
yeah,
we'll
there's
be on the
definitely some
lookout
things
for
I
that.
can't talk about. Yeah.
Do you do commercial gigs? And if so, what has been your favorite one?
I've been lucky that I haven't really had, or I've been lucky in that I've worked definitely collaborated with like brands and other sort of commercial, companies, but I've always been able to do it like as an artist. Like I've always been able to maintain my artistic style and a large degree of creative control. So yeah, so I've definitely collaborated. I've collaborated with like fashion brands, for instance, Italian fashion labels, other things like that. So yeah, but I've always been, in my capacity as an artist, and that's been really amazing. Yeah, so before the pandemic, I was like working with Vogue Italia and Brunello Cucinelli, where I was designing some animations and visuals highlighting, the new spring collection from that Italian fashion brand. So that was a really cool collaboration. I love doing things like that.
Very cool. Someone asked, you're lauded by a wide swath of collectors and institutions, brands. What would you say to digital artists who are challenged connecting with the traditional art space and feel like they're ostracized?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that definitely happens, And again, like I said, there, up until I mean, it's still there in some way, but it's starting to change. I think there's definitely that like sort of stigma where for some reason anything that was created with a piece of digital software or computer was sort of relegated to these like subsets of art world or creative industry or creative worlds. And so hopefully that's starting to change again. Hopefully people are starting to realize the value that art created with digital software has. And so hopefully that's starting to change. But I think, in terms of advice, I would give it's important just to think of yourself as an artist. I never like to call myself just a digital artist or anything like that. I've always just called myself an artist. And because, you could be so much more than just an NFT artist, right? Being an artist is so much cooler than being, I think, an NFT artist, And yeah, you can make NFTs, but think of them as part of a larger practice. Think of them as part of a larger effort to express yourself. And so that means different things for different people, but don't just like pigeonhole yourself to doing one thing. Don't just pigeonhole yourself to doing just NFTs. You have to think about yourself in I think, a more broader way would be my advice.
Thank you so much. I can tell that's really resonated with some people in our community that were listening in our conversation. Jonathan, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon to talk about your drop and really give us a lot of insight into what makes you tick and what got you here at this point today. Just to remind everybody, this drop is live. Tetramorphs. It's on Makersplace, and this is the first iterations of what will be a series of the Zodiac and the Tetramorphs. More to come. I'll have my eye out for Capricorn. That's me, and I don't know whether I'll be dreaming or in some kind of nightmare scape, but if so, I guess it's appropriate given the name.
Yeah, I'll make it. I'll make a good one for you.
Awesome, Jonathan. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.